couple seconds to say thank you so much to Magna Ignacio and everyone who has been involved in the organization of this event. We're absolutely honored and thrilled to be here. I will start with a brief introduction to the project, just to let you know when we started and where we stand right now. The project started on September 1st, 2011, so we have just finished our second year, and we are just about to finish the data collection. Unfortunately, a couple of data points are still coming in, but we really wanted to start presenting our results so we can get as much feedback and comments as possible and have time to still incorporate them into our project. So we wanted to thank you in advance for your comments and suggestions. We'll be extremely grateful for everything you could offer. This is our first dissemination event for the project, and we really wanted to start in Brazil, especially in Brazil, because this is where the literature on coalitional presidentialism was born. In my presentation, I talked briefly about the evolution of the presidential debate. I will follow up with what we already know about the coalitional management already. I will follow up with a little bit on the project. What are the main research objectives? What are theoretical claims? And I'll finish up to give you a little bit of introduction and flavor of what kind of data we have collected. Three of my colleagues will follow up and will present our very preliminary results from the project, focusing on three regions: post-communist countries, Latin America, and Africa. In the past 20 years, the debate of presidentialism has evolved through many important stages, starting from a very pessimistic view provided by Linz, that presidential systems have been destined for collapse. However, many scholars afterwards came in and showed that the presidential systems can survive, and many of these scholars were actually born in Brazil. Today, we already know a little bit about coalitional management. In particular, we know that the formation and survival of coalitions depends on legislative powers of the president. That the size of the president's own party really matters for coalitional management. That the cabinet coalescence matters for the internal discipline of the coalitions. That the selection of non-partisan ministers influences the governing style of the president. That the coalitions tend to erode toward the end of the presidential term. In other words, that the electoral cycle really, really matters. And finally, a recent development is that the very existence of a dominant pro-presidential faction in the legislature creates a new meta-cleavage in the political life, which can be described very simply as the ins versus outs, or government versus opposition. Also growing at a very fast pace, there are a couple of gaps in the scholarship on coalitional presidentialism up to today. We have only a very fragmented understanding of coalitional governance around the world. It has overwhelmingly studied the formal tools that the presidents use to form and maintain their coalitions. Yet in most cases, these tools were examined in isolation, individually, and in a single country or region, typically Latin America. In most cases, the debate ended up being a little bit univariate. And today, from empirical and theoretical perspective, we're still without a general conceptual framework that would facilitate comparison across polities as diverse as Brazil under Lula, Kuchma's Ukraine, and Kenya under Kibaki. Lastly, and importantly, even though coalitional governance is frequently credited for the survival of the presidential systems. We still know far too little about how this affects democratic accountability. In our project, we very much would like to contribute to the ongoing literature on coalitional presidentialism and to fill in a few of the gaps that are still exist in the debate. In particular, we have two main objectives in the project. The first one, we would like to uncover and analyze the tools that the presidents use to create and manage coalitions and multi-party systems. And the second objective is to assess the consequences of these tools for democratic accountability. This is what we refer to as a trade-off between governability versus accountability. Today's presentations will focus primarily on the first objective. We would like to start with the tools. In the project, we make four interrelated claims. We agree and accept that presidents are equipped with a toolbox which allows them to initiate and cultivate inter-party coalitions. We argue that presidents tend to use these five key tools, but they don't use them all at once, and sometimes they use them in different mixtures. And that may vary across presidents, across countries, and contexts and time. We also argue that the tools are imperfectly substitutable. And finally, we argue that there is a possibility that there is a trade-off for democratization. In other words, we would like to see if these tools that enhance presidential power and help the president to govern, whether they can also erode legislative capacity, horizontal accountability, transparency, and party systems. So what's in the toolbox of the president? We focus on five main tools. The first one is the legislative powers of the president. The second is the control over public spending or budgetary prerogatives. The third one is the ability of the president to allocate portfolios among coalition parties. The fourth one is the present powers of the president. And finally, we also add an important tool, which so far we call informal institutions. We do not claim that this is an exhaustive typology of all the tools that exist. Actually, we do accept that the president may use different tools that are not on our list. Or they can use some tools, but not others, in different countries. To discover that, we would like to go a little bit beyond Latin America when studying coalitional management. In particular, our project focuses on three regions: Latin America, post-communist countries, and Africa. We picked three countries from each region. We work on Brazil, Chile, and Ecuador in Latin America, Russia, Ukraine, and Armenia from post-communist countries, and we focus on Benin, Malawi, and Kenyan politics in Africa. So the main goals of the project are actually twofold. We would like to contribute to theoretical development of the literature, but we also would like to contribute empirically by extending the study of coalitional presidentialism beyond Latin America. So we did have to collect some data. We're collecting three types of data. We start with the interviews, and you could see a copy of our questionnaire that I think Magna also contributed to developing when she was in Oxford. And we have translated the questionnaire into 7 languages to make sure that our consultants can conduct interviews in the native language of the deputies. Just a little bit on our sample. There's a total of 350 deputies that we have interviewed in 9 countries. When constructing the sample, we try to pay attention to the composition of the parliament. We try to include in the sample 60% would be members of the coalition, 40% of the sample would be members of the opposition. Inside each group, we would try to have a balance of different parties that construct each category. And finally, it was very important to us to include the appropriate mix of party backbenchers and party leaders. You could see a quick breakdown of the sample across countries. We have a very large sample for Ukraine, Russia, and Brazil. It's largely dependent on the size of the parliament. The parliaments are a bit smaller in Kenya and Malawi, and finally even smaller in Ecuador, Chile, and Benin. A little bit on our questionnaire, just to give you a flavor of what data is just about to come. The questionnaire includes 12 structured and 10 semi-structured questions. So for 12 questions, the deputies were able to make a choice between provided answers. And for 10 questions, we just asked the question and allowed them to answer. All the semi-structured questions and answers have been transcribed. The questionnaire includes 5 main categories of questions. We asked the deputies about the nature of the coalitions in their country, about formal and informal tools that the presidents can use, about the importance of the presidential powers, as well as personal characteristics and experiences. And finally, we ended with questions on democracy and accountability. And I think you will have a chance to take a quick look at our questionnaire that's being distributed in Portuguese. There's other 2 types of data that we've also collected. The second type, we try to collect a number of objective legislative indicators, what we call them, or hard data. We try to collect data on the composition and the size of coalitions in each country over time, as well as the size and the composition of the cabinet. We also, as much as possible, try to locate any data on the legislative process. It was easier in some countries, like Brazil, which was fantastic. It was much more difficult in other countries, like Benin. Finally, we have decided to write 5 case studies. 2 of the cases tracked legislation that has been successfully passed by the president. Another 2 cases tracked legislation that has failed. And finally, we worked on the budget case study. The objective of the case studies was to dig a bit deeper and get the flavor and the context of how the tools are used, why are they successful, and when do they fail. So now we'll have 3 presentations by my colleagues, and we'll start with the very preliminary first presentations of the results from the post-communist countries.